Rain pounded the courthouse steps as I stared at the deed in my shaking hands. My father's house, the only thing he'd left me, but with my boss's name stamped across it in bold, official letters. My throat closed up. I couldn't breathe properly. She took it. I whispered to no one. She actually took my home. Behind me, her heels clicked against the wet stone, confident and victorious. "Next time read what you sign, sweetheart," Mallory Harrow said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. My vision blurred with a fury so hot it felt like ice in my veins. Right there, standing in the rain, I made a decision. My name is Eliza Rowan, and this is how I took everything back from the woman who tried to destroy me. This is how I won. The next morning at work felt like walking into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Mallory, our senior director, with a smile sharp as broken glass, held up one of my reports during the team meeting. "Everyone, this is what sloppy work looks like," she announced, waving the papers around. My co-workers stared at their laptops, too uncomfortable to meet my eyes. My cheeks burned hot with humiliation. I knew the truth, though. She wasn't actually mad about my work. My reports were always thorough and professional. No. She was taunting me because she'd already stolen my inheritance, and she wanted me to know she could humiliate me whenever she pleased. She was showing me exactly how powerless I was. Or so she thought. In the hallway after the meeting, she cornered me near the water cooler. She leaned in close, her expensive perfume sharp and suffocating in my nose. "You should thank me honestly," she said quietly, so only I could hear. A house like that deserves someone who can actually maintain it properly. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth buzzed and my head ached. This wasn't just about abusing her power over me as my boss. She was enjoying every second of my pain. She wanted me to know she'd won, that she'd outsmarted me, and there was nothing I could do about it. The cruelty in her eyes made something inside me snap into sharp focus. I wouldn't let this stand. I couldn't. 2 months earlier, she'd pulled me into her office on a grey afternoon. "Eliza, I know dealing with your father's estate must be overwhelming for you," she'd said, her voice warm and concerned. I was grieving, exhausted from funeral arrangements and paperwork. I trusted her because she was my boss and had always seemed professional before. She slid papers toward me across her polished desk. "These are just routine employment verification forms," she explained smoothly. "HR needs them updated with your current address and next of kin information." I signed them without reading carefully. I was too tired, too sad, too trusting. Those weren't employment forms at all. They were transfer of interest documents for my father's property. She stole the deed right in front of me, and I'd helped her do it. After that courthouse encounter, I sat in my car in the parking garage and cried for a full hour. My whole body shook with sobs. Everything my father had worked for. Gone. Stolen by someone I'd trusted. But then, something inside me changed. Something hardened and solidified, like cooling glass. I wiped my face, looked at myself in the rearview mirror, and whispered the words that would guide everything that came next. If she wants a war, it'll be one she started, and I'll be the one to finish it. My tears dried. My hands stopped shaking. I started my car and drove home, already planning my first move. She'd made a terrible mistake thinking I would just accept this quietly. For a whole week I said absolutely nothing to Mallory about the house. I didn't confront her or complain or cry at work. I just watched her carefully. I observed how she bragged to other managers about her new property investment, how she cut corners on expense reports when she thought no one was looking, how she hid certain documents in her bottom desk drawer instead of filing them properly with compliance. She thought I was broken, defeated, too scared to fight back. She had no idea I was actually studying her, learning her patterns, documenting her mistakes. Every careless move she made I filed away in my memory. Knowledge was going to be my weapon, and patience my strategy. I scheduled an appointment with a probate attorney named Marcus Delgado. His office smelled like old books and coffee. I brought copies of everything I'd managed to obtain related to my father's estate. He flipped through the papers slowly, his eyebrows rising higher with each page. "These signatures are formatted incorrectly for legal transfer documents," he said finally. "And this notary stamp looks suspicious to me. The registration number doesn't match the standard format." A spark of hope lit in my chest for the first time in weeks. "Can I prove it was fraud?" I asked, trying not to sound too eager. He looked up at me and smiled slightly. "Oh, you can do much more than just prove it. We can absolutely destroy this case." Finally, I had an ally. We needed solid evidence, though, not just suspicions and hunches, so I started digging quietly through everything I could access. Email logs from work servers, old estate files my father had kept organized in his study, a timestamp on the document submission that Mallory didn't realize even existed because it was embedded in the metadata. Every discovery felt like turning a knife slowly into her perfect polished image. I worked late nights, going through boxes of my father's paperwork. I found his original will, his deed records, his correspondence with the county assessor. Everything contradicted what Mallory had filed with the court. The evidence was piling up beautifully. She'd been sloppy in her greed. While searching through public records online one evening, I noticed something odd about Mallory's own finances. She'd taken out a second mortgage on her house 6 months ago for almost $200,000. The interesting part? Her husband's name wasn't on the application at all. That seemed strange for a married couple who jointly owned their home. Either he didn't know about it, or she'd somehow managed to secure it without his required consent. Both scenarios suggested serious problems in her personal life. This information felt important, though I wasn't sure exactly how yet. I saved the records to my growing file. You never knew what details might become useful later in a legal battle. Around this time, my co-workers started noticing changes in Mallory's behavior. She'd always been demanding, but now she was constantly snapping at people over tiny mistakes. Her paranoia seemed to be growing daily. She'd accuse people of talking about her behind her back. She'd demand to see email chains she wasn't included on originally. But here's the thing, I didn't do anything to cause this. I just let her unravel herself naturally. Guilt and fear have a way of eating people alive from the inside. She was cracking under the weight of what she'd done, and everyone in the office could see it happening. Some people whispered about her in the break room. I just smiled and said nothing at all. Then HR called me in for a meeting. I sat across from the HR director, trying to appear calm. "We've noticed some tension between you and Mallory lately," she said carefully, watching my reaction. I kept my voice steady and professional. "I'm just focusing on doing my work well and meeting my deadlines." The HR director leaned forward slightly. "If there's anything you need to report about her management style or any inappropriate behavior, you should know this is a safe space for that." I considered telling them everything right then, but my attorney had advised patience. "I appreciate that," I said instead. "I'll definitely keep it in mind if anything comes up." I filed that invitation away for later use. Timing would be everything. My attorney sent Mallory a quiet, professional request through certified mail. It simply asked her to provide proof that the property transfer had been voluntary and that I'd been fully informed of what I was signing. Her response came 3 days later. It was an email absolutely full of insults, threats about my job security, and multiple contradictions about the timeline of events. She couldn't keep her story straight because she was lying. "This is perfect," Marcus said when I forwarded it to him. "She's documenting her own guilt. People who are telling the truth don't get defensive and threatening like this. They simply provide the requested documentation." We now had her angry, inconsistent response as evidence of her consciousness of guilt. She was helping us build our case. She cornered me again near the elevator one afternoon. "What exactly are you trying to pull, Eliza?" she demanded, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. I held her gaze calmly. "I'm not pulling anything. I'm just living my life and doing my job." She stepped closer, invading my personal space in a way that would have intimidated me weeks ago. "You're not going to win whatever game you think you're playing. I have lawyers. I have resources. You have nothing." Inside, I smiled, though my face remained neutral. She had no idea that her arrogance was going to be her downfall. "I'm not playing any games, Mallory," I said quietly, "but I hope you have good lawyers. You're going to need them soon." I walked away, leaving her fuming. The breakthrough came when we tracked down the notary who'd supposedly witnessed my signature on the transfer documents. His name was printed clearly on the stamp: Douglas Pemberton. Marcus hired an investigator who discovered something beautiful. Douglas had been out of the country on the exact date shown on the notarization. He'd been in Vancouver for his daughter's wedding, with plane tickets, hotel reservations, and about 50 wedding photos to prove it. He couldn't have possibly notarized anything in our state that day. When Marcus interviewed him, Douglas was horrified. "Someone forged my notary stamp," he said. "That's a serious crime." We now had recorded proof that Mallory's documentation was fraudulent. Her entire case was built on lies, and those lies were crumbling into dust. HR called both of us in for a joint meeting. I could see Mallory was nervous, though she tried to hide it behind a smile so tight her left eyelid twitched visibly. Her voice actually shook slightly when she spoke about department procedures. Everyone in that room noticed her unusual behavior. She was losing her famous composure, that cool control she'd always maintained so carefully. For someone who'd seemed unshakable before, she now appeared fragile and uncertain. It was fascinating to watch. I answered all questions calmly and professionally, providing clear documentation for everything I claimed. The contrast between us was obvious. She looked guilty because she was guilty. The meeting ended with HR promising to follow up soon. I knew they were starting their own investigation now. A co-worker named Patricia approached me quietly in the parking lot one evening. "Can I talk to you about something?" she asked, looking nervous. We sat in her car where no one could overhear. "I remember the day Mallory asked you to sign those papers," Patricia said. "I was walking past her office, and I heard her on the phone right after you left. She said she'd finally found a way to secure something big for herself. She sounded really excited and kind of ruthless, honestly. It made me uncomfortable at the time. I asked if she'd be willing to provide a sworn statement about what she'd heard. She agreed immediately. "What she did to you isn't right," Patricia said. "I want to help." Another piece of evidence secured. Then something unexpected happened that I hadn't even orchestrated. The compliance department randomly selected Mallory's division for a routine file audit. Pure chance. Or maybe karma finally catching up to her. The auditors discovered her missing paperwork, altered records where she'd changed dates and signatures, and clear evidence of her misusing her approval authority for personal benefit. Nothing to do with my father's house specifically, but plenty of other policy violations. The compliance report went straight to the executive team. Mallory was suddenly under investigation from multiple directions at once. I hadn't engineered this particular disaster for her, but I certainly wasn't going to feel bad about it either. Her house of cards was collapsing room by room. Her financial troubles multiplied rapidly after that. Her unpaid second mortgage triggered an automatic lender review when she missed 2 consecutive payments. The bank threatened foreclosure proceedings if she didn't catch up immediately. During their investigation, they contacted her husband about the loan. That's when he discovered she'd borrowed $200,000 without telling him. Their marriage exploded spectacularly. He filed for separation within a week. She actually tried to blame me for this somehow, sending me angry texts claiming I'd destroyed her life. But I hadn't touched her marriage or her finances. She'd done all of this to herself through her own greed and dishonesty. I blocked her number and focused on preparing for court. Justice was coming, and nothing could stop it now. The pre-trial conference arrived on a cold morning in November. My attorney presented our evidence package to the judge and Mallory's legal team. Page after page of proof. The forged notarization, the inconsistent timeline, the witness statements, the email contradictions. Mallory's attorney's face went progressively paler as he read through everything. "This documentation is quite problematic for our position," he admitted quietly to Mallory, though we could all hear him. The case is essentially indefensible at this point. Mallory slammed her folder shut hard enough that everyone jumped. This is absolutely ridiculous. She signed it willingly. She's just bitter and trying to get revenge. The judge looked over his glasses at her. Miss Harrow, please be seated and allow your attorney to speak for you. Her loss of control was now part of the official court record. The actual courtroom hearing was almost anticlimactic because our evidence was so overwhelming. Mallory claimed under oath that I'd signed willingly and had been fully informed about what the documents meant. But then Marcus presented the security video timestamp from our office building. It showed me entering Mallory's office at exactly 2:15 on that afternoon. The notarization on the documents claimed 2 o'clock, 15 minutes before I'd even arrived. She'd lied about the time to make her forged notary stamp match her story, but she'd forgotten about building security cameras. The judge's expression grew stern as he reviewed the video evidence. This appears to show clear fraud, coercion, and intentional misrepresentation, he said. The transfer documentation is void. I felt tears of relief starting in my eyes. Everything in Mallory's life collapsed at once after that. Her husband's divorce filing became final within months since they had no children, and he wanted out quickly. Her mortgage lender froze her accounts due to the fraud investigation, making it impossible for her to access her own money. The company placed her on immediate administrative leave pending termination after the compliance audit results. She tried calling me probably a dozen times that week. I declined every single call without hesitation. I had nothing to say to her anymore. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. Sometimes I'd see her number light up my phone screen, and I'd just watch it ring until it went to voicemail. She never left messages. What could she possibly say that would matter now? To pay her mounting legal fees and divorce attorney costs, Mallory listed her house for sale, but the sale couldn't proceed because multiple liens had been placed against the property by her creditors. The bank, her divorce attorney, even the IRS had claims against her assets now. The house sat on the market for months with no viable buyers since no one could get clear title. Eventually, it fell into pre-foreclosure status. The notice appeared in the legal section of the local newspaper. I saw it one morning over coffee and felt absolutely no joy in her suffering. This wasn't about happiness or revenge for me anymore. It was simply about justice being served. She'd tried to take everything from me, and instead she'd lost everything herself through her own actions. The judge's final ruling came on a sunny Tuesday morning that felt almost too beautiful for the occasion. His voice echoed through the courtroom formally. The deed transfer to Miss Harrow is hereby declared invalid and void due to fraud and misrepresentation. Full ownership of the property returns to Miss Eliza Rowan immediately. Effective today. My breath came out in a long, trembling exhale I hadn't realized I'd been holding. I'd gotten my father's house back, legally, cleanly, and completely. No more fighting, no more uncertainty. Marcus squeezed my shoulder congratulations. Across the courtroom, Mallory sat frozen, her face completely blank with shock. She truly believed she'd get away with it until the very end. I gathered my papers, thanked the judge, and walked out of that courthouse a winner. My father would have been proud. Mallory's house finally entered foreclosure auction 3 months later. I'd been monitoring the legal notices almost by habit at that point. My attorney called me when he saw the listing. "You're eligible to bid on the property if you're interested," Marcus mentioned casually. "You have the financial standing after settling your father's estate, and there's no legal restriction preventing it." I thought about it for exactly 1 day. Then I decided to do it. Not for revenge, but because it was a good investment property in a decent neighborhood. I attended the auction, bid conservatively but firmly, and won. Her house now belonged to me, purchased fairly, publicly, and completely legally. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. What she'd tried to steal from me, I'd now acquired from her through legitimate means. Months later, on a warm spring morning, I stood in the doorway of my father's house, finally fully restored. Sunlight warmed the hardwood floorboards he'd installed himself years ago, back when I was still in middle school. I'd repainted the walls in the soft blue colour he'd always loved. His favourite chair sat by the window overlooking the garden. "I did it, Dad," I whispered to the empty, peaceful rooms. "I got it back." Across town, Mallory had faded completely from my life. She was jobless now, divorced, living in a small apartment she could barely afford. Her own greed had destroyed her more thoroughly than I ever could have. But my story wasn't really about destroying her at all. It was about rebuilding myself, reclaiming what was mine, and learning that patience and justice could win against cruelty and theft. I was finally free, finally home, finally at peace.